Would you please stand as you are able for the reading of the gospel this morning? We are reading from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? We have observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." And when King Herod had heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it had been written by the prophet, 'For you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least amongst the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for this child, and when you have found him, bring word so that I may go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went that star they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. And on entering that house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. And they knelt down and they worshipped him. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold and of frankincense and myrrh. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Last year, a story went viral in Canada about a gift that had been unopened and under a Christmas tree for 50 years. In the 1970s, Adrian Pierce's girlfriend gave him a Christmas gift before class in high school, but then she broke up with him immediately after giving him that present. And so, like a dramatic teenager, which none of you were, he promised never to open that present and yet to put it under his tree every single year. I don't know why his mom let him do that, but I thought, he said, perhaps by holding on to the present, there would be a chance in the future that that girl and I would get back together. Well, they didn't. He married a whole other person and had children with her, and it became a joke to Adrian and his family. Fast forward, and he had been married to another woman for 40 years and was still holding on to the gift and decided it was time to open it, but he wanted to find his 40 years gone ex-girlfriend. So he did what we all do. He used Facebook. He put it on social media, and he finally found her, Vicki Allen. After finding her, the two of them had their own high school reunion, a party with friends and family to watch the unwrapping of this long-awaited gift. And it turns out she had forgotten what she bought him, because of course she did. And inside was a book titled Love Is. Now, I have never held on to a gift out of spite or because of a broken heart, but I have held on to gifts because timing wasn't working right. Sometimes you're not together on birthdays or Christmases or anniversaries, and so the wrapped present, well, you keep it with you till you can be together. And our scripture story is a little bit like that. These wise men, we don't know how many, it doesn't say 3. We don't know really where they're from. It doesn't say. They're just from the east, that way. Is that actually east? Which way is east? That way, east. They're traveling to meet the newborn King of the Jews that they have discerned not because they know Scripture, but because they look at the stars. They've got gifts ready to give him, but they're running late because they don't know where they're going, and they don't know who they're looking for, and they don't know how they'll know when they get there. I don't know that I've never bought presents for somebody I don't know, and I don't know where they live, and I don't know when I'm going to get there. We don't have to run late with our gift giving for Jesus, though. We believe that Christ is with us every day, out in the world right now, and we've been called to give our gifts as soon as we meet him. But I've been thinking a lot about gift giving because I'm basically the executive director of a small religious nonprofit. That's what I tell people on planes so they don't talk to me about religion. I pay attention to all those studies and all those articles about people's giving patterns, including that tax cut that happened a couple of years ago, because just like we feared, that tax cut has severely depressed all giving to charities, including churches. Now, some people give purely out of altruistic desire. All they want to do is to see good done. More people give for what's called impurely altruistic reasons. They want to see good done, but they get a certain amount of satisfaction of being involved in making sure things get done. And then there are the people who only ever give because they want to look good. And I'm sure that's none of you, but we see it all the time, don't we? People who would only give because a camera is on them. And now inundating people with numbers has a way of making people give less. And people won't give if you give them statistics about a scale of a problem or how effective a charity gives. Numbers don't get people to give. Stories about people get people to give. And other people giving get people to give. You can't say 65 million people are displaced and are refugees. You have to tell the story about one refugee, about one life, and then people will have gifts ready. But even then, this is what we are. People are less likely to give to someone right in front of them if they decide that person doesn't deserve it, or that they might be the cause of their own misery. Without knowing anything, we become misers with our gifts. Getting folks to part with what they have is a tricky business, so I find the story of the wise men amazingly generous. Let's begin by acknowledging that Matthew's version of Christmas and Luke's version are totally different from each other. Luke is about Mary and shepherds, and Matthew is about Joseph and wise men, and the timing of each of those stories is totally different. So in Matthew's version of the baby Jesus story, baby Jesus isn't a baby anymore. Matthew uses the word for child instead of for infant. And considering that Herod is about to have every kid under 2 in Bethlehem murdered, we know we're actually working with toddler Jesus. So our wise men have been on the road for probably 3 years, following a star pointing towards a mysterious king who is born into a family that only recently moved to Bethlehem because the government has put them on a registry. There are lots of traditions about what these gifts mean. The early church father Origen said, gold as to a king, myrrh as to one who will die, and incense as to a god. Others point out that myrrh is a priceless perfume and that the Queen of Sheba herself may have given gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the King Solomon when she made trade agreements with him. Maybe gold, frankincense, and myrrh seem like very impractical gifts to give to a toddler and his parents. I would not give a toddler incense for any amount of money. But they only seem impractical if you forget they're about to be on the run. And then, those are very valuable things to trade. to make sure you get where you're going. Whatever the meaning of these 3 gifts, though, 3 years is a long time to carry presents, especially valuable presents like gold and frankincense and myrrh. They're always intended for someone else, and our wise men over these 3 years have not succumbed to the temptation to sell them to make their own journey easier, or just to quit the journey at all and go back home with what they brought. And when they arrive, they don't question whether or not Jesus and his family need these gifts. They don't comment on how humble or exceptional his dwelling is. They do not ask to see his documentation or his birth certificate or his qualifications for receiving kingly gifts. They simply kneel before him, and they offer the gifts to him, believing that a star is enough to tell them that this is the one they've looked for, the one whose life threatens the power and cruelty of every petty king on his throne. I have read enough fantasy and science fiction stories to recognize this is part of a hero's journey story, of taking a path to look for that which will change you and change the world. It's mysticism and it's romance and it's gritty sand and it's long days and nights and strange astrologers looking for a savior of a religion they don't even belong to. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I wish there was more of that mystery in our world, of less knowing and more hoping. I mean, our deepest oceans and the deep recesses of space, we still don't really understand them, but I feel like in these days we're so certain that it's made it so there are no more long journeys for us and there are no more mysteries which might change us. We are on the other side of time from Jesus' birth, and we don't have to seek and find Jesus because we've already got him, right? But we don't. Because one of those other stories tells us that after Jesus rose from the dead, he ascended into heaven, and somehow he said, "I will always be with you." And so really, truly, most of us spend the rest of our life looking for him, especially when we're hurt and lost and lonely and confused about the evil of these days. Like wise men with gifts in hand, we are on a long and lingering hunt for God, but it turns out we didn't need to look so long for him like the wise men did. Near the end of Jesus' life, he tells a story to his best friends about the end of all things and about the final judgment of the living and the dead. And he said, at our elder Bridget read this morning, there is a great shepherd, a king who will divide the flock of humankind into sheep and goats, the righteous from the unrighteous, and to the surprise of the sheep and the goats, the division is based on how they treat the ones who suffer. The hungry, the thirsty, the sick, the imprisoned, those in dire need, the stranger. These people, it turns out, were not just the neighbor they were called to love. These people, every time, were Jesus himself. Every time a hand was held and a meal was served and a door was opened and a person visited and water left out and medicine distributed, it was done so for the living God. So, have you mistakenly been holding on to your gifts and your blessings because you thought the God you were meet was supposed to be the Christ child? And maybe you don't have gold and frankincense and myrrh. I mean, who has those things? But you have money, or you have skills, or you can teach, or you have time, and you can donate, or you are a shoulder to cry on, or you have a platform to lend out, or you have wisdom to share, or you have a reputation that you can shred for the sake of others. You have all these gifts, and like the wise men, you've been holding tight to them for years because you've been trying not to squander them or to give them to the wrong people. I'm proud of you for wanting to be discerning about who you give what you've got. But friend, it turns out that Jesus has been here the whole time. And it's time you loosen your grip on what you have. You are in a city filled with hungry and thirsty and sick and cold and imprisoned people, and every single one of those people is Christ amongst us. Every single one of those people is the God who deserves your gifts. No matter if they're mentally ill or not, no matter if they're kind or not, no matter if they're responsible for their own suffering or not, whether they're documented or not, whether they're incarcerated because they're guilty or because they're innocent, Christ tells us that if we're looking for him, if we've got these birthday presents we're ready to give, we're going to find him with and in and amongst those who suffer, and he's ready for those gifts now. Thanks. It's his birthday. Whatever stars that we've been watching to tell us when to stop and dismount from this journey that we have taken, that star rose and stopped a long time ago, and it's right over our city because Jesus is here. And it's time for you to look at the gifts you've got and to, with joy, start giving them away. So this week, I want you to take stock. Money or items, whatever. Or maybe it's intellectual possessions you can give. Can you donate skills? Can you, as a lawyer, a teacher, a therapist, a gardener, a poet, an activist, an interior decorator, an accountant, a professional organizer? All of you have gifts. And once you've taken your inventory, I want you to pray that God will reveal to you one person this week you can give those gifts to. And not as a check, but in person. I need you to watch for the star and follow it to whoever it takes you to, knowing that when it stops, you will be in the presence of Christ, who is ready to receive the gifts you have. Don't hold on to your gifts so long you become a joke. Don't withhold your generosity because you're trying to do the calculus of whether or not someone deserves what you have to give. The lesson of Jesus is that no one deserves anything God gives, and God gives it anyway. This is the season, not just of the baby Jesus, but of the Jesus who grows up and goes into the world and can be found in the face of the hungry and thirsty and stranger and imprisoned and sick neighbor. He is here already. He is your neighbor already. He is ready to receive from you right now. Follow your stars. And when you give gifts, may you do it with joy.